Up next on America's Hope, she was gang raped and then became a part of the gang's property, being sexually trafficked around the United States. But she fought back in a most unusual way. Find out why Bishop Donna Hubbard today is saving lives because hope prevails. Good evening, welcome to America's Hope. I'm Kelly Wright, and tonight we're talking about a very serious issue. All of our issues are serious, of course, but this one involves human trafficking, the traffic of human souls. Most notably, women and children, and even some men are human trafficked. Did you know that modern day slavery is far worse than it's ever been when it was legal? And more people are trafficked in and out of America and around the world for sexual favors, and it even involves child exploitation. Tonight we're going to delve into this with a woman who overcame being a victim, and she is now going out trying to make more people aware of trafficking, and through that she's making more people aware of hope. And our hope is not an easy task. It's actually heavy lifting. That's our focus tonight on America's Hope, overcoming the depravity of human trafficking. So we've been focusing on the movie Sound of Freedom and how they've made so many people throughout the world aware of human trafficking, most particular child exploitation. Joining us now is Bishop Donna Hubbard. She's very familiar with this plight that's affecting so many children. You see, she experienced her own situation as someone who was human trafficked and sexually trafficked. Bishop Donna Hubbard, you've been going around the world helping people. In fact, you're an ambassador for the airline industry, teaching airline workers how to be prepared, how to cite what's going on, and how to see and then report it. What can you tell us about making people more aware of child exploitation and child sexual trafficking, because it is an ever-present danger, even right here in America?
Absolutely. Thank you again, Kelly, for Mr. Wright, Kelly Wright, for having me here on America's Hope and for being willing to open this discussion. It's important that we talk about it, because anytime that we don't talk about something, it's considered acceptable behavior. That's the way our communities have lived. Anything that everybody's doing and nobody's talking about is considered acceptable behavior. And for so long, children have been exploited, but no one did anything about it. And our communities often kept silent about what was happening. But it's important that we recognize that our children are our most vulnerable citizens. They are the most vulnerable citizens because they don't know who to trust and who not to trust. And so traffickers count on us being too busy to pay attention and to see what we're looking at. And they count on us being too busy in our own lives to take the time to stop and see about someone else. And so the other thing is, most people don't want to report it. And I have to say this and say it with as much emphasis as I can. Most people don't say something when they see something because, number one, they don't want to get involved, and number two, they don't want to be wrong. And for that reason, most people don't report it. So when I do the training, whether it's to parents of children in elementary school, middle school, or high school, or whether I do the training to people who are adults, I tell them, it's not our responsibility to prosecute anybody, to find anyone guilty. What our responsibility is to recognize it and report it. And knowing what to recognize and knowing what to report is what makes the difference. That's how lives are saved. It's knowing Donna, how to report it, what to report.
What are the things that we should be looking out for so that we protect our children and our children's children and our neighbors' children?
So many of us as parents have to work two jobs, or we're working a job that keeps us away for long periods of time. We trust that our children come home from school and they sit down and do their homework. That's not always the case. Where are your children hanging out? Who are they hanging with? So we're talking about elementary school children, and we're also talking about what are they watching on that phone that you've given them, on that iPad that you've given them, on that laptop that you've given them. And when you notice that they're spending more time doing that than they are playing outside or engaging with other family members, then you need to get involved with what they're looking at. And you need to get involved with it at a time when they're not looking at it. So you need to be able to go into their sites and see what they're looking at. When you're talking about young teenagers, now you want to talk about how long are they staying out? Where are they hanging out? Who are they hanging with? And what are their excuses when they can't, when you ask them where they've been, what are the reasons, and who are they hanging with? Those are the things that make a difference, because when they start having gaps of time when they can't account for that time, you got to know where they are and who they're with.
Are children being lured into this because of what they see online? Is there, are there criminals online and luring children into this kind of illicit activity?
Absolutely. There are back pages. There are TikToks and Instagrams, unfortunately, where things are posted that have code words on them that children understand, that adults don't even understand. Tattoos are not all bad, but some of the kids are ending up with tattoos at very young ages, and we don't know that those tattoos are also branding signs. When you start talking about teenagers, ask your teenagers, do they have friends that leave school at lunchtime with an older boyfriend who drives a fancy car, and they come back sometimes looking like they've been on drugs? Sometimes they don't come back to school. Sometimes they come back with a lot of more money than a teenager would normally have. They may dress more provocatively, and sometimes they have bruises. The other thing, Kelly, that's really interesting is a lot of children are being picked up and taken to juvenile hall and juvenile jail. And what's happening is traffickers have become so smart that they are recruiting young people even in jail. They will ask a young person who's a runaway, where are you going to live when you get out? And if they say, I don't have any place to go, well, you can come and live with me and my dad. You can come and live with me and my boyfriend. And this is the kind of recruiting that's being done even in jails right now and juvenile detention centers.
So they're actually enticing them and seducing them into what a child might think is a better way of living, and then they find out that they're wrapped up in a nightmare and too fearful to get out. Look, in all of this, how do you bring hope to families of finding their children and saving their children who have been victimized already?
I think I have to break it down into two questions. Those parents who, well, maybe three questions. So to be proactive, be involved in your children's lives. We have 18 summers with our children. And if you start counting down how many summers you've already had, that means you only have a certain number left. But what's happening to them in those summers, what's happening to them in those years is what is going to formulate their identity. And so many young people get engaged in human trafficking because they've lost their identity to something that happened to them. And oftentimes it's something that they don't even tell their parents happened to them. So I would say, first of all, be involved in your children's lives. I mean literally involved, not only in their lives, but whoever's around them and the people that they're around. That's number one. For families who have children that are missing, then it's going to take some hard work. It's going to take talking to officials, authorities, and it's going to take saying them some of the difficult things, like signs that you saw that you didn't pay attention to. And so often we're worried about our reputation and what other people think about us, but our child is out there hoping that you haven't forgotten them, hoping that somebody is going to come and rescue them, that somebody will see them. When I was being trafficked, and I was a young adult, but when I was being trafficked, the one thing I wanted was for someone to see me. Someone see me. And quite often we'll drive down these dark streets and see these young girls out late at night dressed inappropriately. And we say that's somebody else's problem, somebody else's business. And we don't pay attention to it until that shows up in the news or it shows up as a missing person.
Yeah.
And we think about, I just saw that kid. I just saw that girl. I just saw that boy on the street. And then for those, I would also say for those parents who have had that trauma happen to their children, they don't think that, and I'm saying this in all earnesty because I am a bishop. Don't think that once you finish praying, that's all you have to do. You need help.
Yeah.
We need therapists. They need to be able to talk to someone. They need to be able to heal, because there's a difference between being healed and being delivered. You might be rescued, but you're really only saved when you're really only rescued when somebody comes to get you. In other words, just because you are no longer in that situation doesn't mean that you don't think that you are still enslaved. And it's a process of the mind. Traffickers are first going to go after those children's minds and make them feel that nobody cares about them. The family has forgotten about them. Nobody's going to want them. Everything from telling them, if you go back home, we're going to send these pictures and your parents are going to be ashamed and the community is going to know. And when you're talking about a young person, a teenager, hears that and they think about the shame that they may bring to their family, it almost paralyzes them. It makes them feel that they have no one to turn to except that trafficker who is exploiting them. So if you have a child that has had some trauma, such as trafficking or exploitation happen to them, get them the help that they need. Yes, you do need people of faith praying for you, praying for that child, praying for that family, because you don't just steal the child, you steal that family's hope, you steal that family's heart. And so if you've had that happen, get them the help that they need. Yes, you want people that care about you, praying for you, not about you, but praying for you and praying for your children. But you also need professionals to help turn that process of trauma into triumph and turn that process of being a victim into being a survivor.
Appreciate you so much, Bishop Donna Hubbard, for bringing us some very important topics of discussion about child trafficking, but more importantly, what we can do about it and getting through it together. That's really what it requires, together, not just the parents and the children, but also society at large. We do have to do the right thing in order for our children, our future, to have the hope and not a disastrous future, but a hopeful future. Thank you so much for bringing that topic to us. Bishop
Thank you
Donna
very
Hubbard
much for having me and
Hope.
for bringing this discussion to the forefront. Thank you very much.
It's a discussion we have to have a discussion like this more often. So these conversations are very important for America. Thank you. Thank you, Bishop Donna Hubbard. Good evening. Welcome to America's Hope. I'm Kelly Wright. And I want to talk about hope tonight, but how do we find hope in the midst of the troubles that our children face? You see, the threats that our children face today are growing. Saving a life against those threats is very important. We've seen mass shootings. Children are practicing active shooting drills in our schools, not just our colleges and high schools and middle schools, but even in our elementary schools and preschools. What is happening? Then there's the specter of human trafficking, domestic violence, and even suicide ideation, and assault and bullying, sexual assault, all of these things going on in our classrooms of America. And you might be asking the question, well, gee, Kelly, if you're talking about all of that, how do we find hope? Well, stick around. We're going to show you how to find hope by being prepared for the real world. And our guest is Brian Searcy. He's the founder and creator and the executive director and CEO, all of the above, for Paratus Group. The Paratus Group is a very important component in the fight against these maladies that have been confronting our children and those of us who are parents and grandparents. Brian, good of you to join us on America's Hope. Thank you for being here, and thank you for what you're doing. Let's begin with how you created the Paratus Group. What led to that?
Yeah, so this goes back a number of years, and Kelly, thanks for having me on. It's an honor to be on this show with you this evening.
An honor to have you. Thank you.
After a major shooting here in South Texas in the late 2018 timeframe, 2018 timeframe, I got together with a number of former military and law enforcement to try and figure out how do we solve this active shooter problem that is going on in the schools in our communities. And it was in Connecticut. There were about 14 of us, and I came back to Texas and decided I wanted to really start addressing the active shooter problem. So I got together with four other people, and we started going into schools here in North Texas and doing assessments and helping them prepare for active shooter scenarios. With then even starting then, the focus was how do we prevent it from happening? Because if we wait until things respond, then it's obviously too late. Um, like I mentioned, they were former military, law enforcement. They went on and did some other things and wanted to keep doing the active shooter stuff when I realized that I needed to focus on how do we prevent it from happening. And then I took my 23 years of time in the Air Force and my subsequent 10 or 12 years after I retired, where I've got a lot of leadership experience, training experience, and it was all about preparation. Because when you fly airplanes, when you get ready to go into a conflict, when you get ready to go into combat, you have to do a whole lot of preparation, because you will only be able to do those types of things that you've prepared for. So in 2019, I took all of that experience and put together a program that is designed to prevent bad things from happening through the development of habits, behaviors, and mindset through a micro e-learning program. This program goes on for a year, but it only takes about 5 or 10 minutes a day. But we teach a process that people practice so they truly become prepared like I said, to prevent things from happening, but then they're also prepared to protect themselves, their family, and their community if something bad does happen.
That's so important, and it sounds to me like you're discussing with them what should be obvious, and yet it isn't, and that's situational awareness, paying attention to what you see. In America, following the war on terror, we started saying something, see something, say something. That was, of course, following the tragic results of the 9/11 attack on America. See something, say something has value. It teaches us how to be proactive and vigilant in caring for each other. Is that what this stems from, the fact that you wanted people to be engaged and aware of what's going on?
Well, absolutely. And according to the Harvard Business Review, and I've actually done a couple in unofficial studies over the last year or so, but according to the Harvard Business Review, less than 1 in 7 people today actually knows what situational awareness is, much less practices it. And in my own observations, it's probably closer to only 1 in 15 people actually pay attention to what is going on. And that has a lot of consequences. If you're not paying attention to something and to your environment, then the chances of something bad happening dramatically go up. And then secondly, if you don't act and behave like you're paying attention, you are much more likely to be a victim, because you are then the easy target for the predator. Now let's talk about the see something, say something. And it's been in the schools now for a number of years, yet all of the threats that you talked about at the beginning of the show tonight have all gotten worse over the last 4 to 5 years. And why is that? Well, it's because we have traditional type training. It's because we have programs like See Something, Say Something, which are valuable. I'm not going to say that they're not valuable, but when people don't develop the habits, the behaviors, and a mindset to be perceptive, when they don't practice the 10 critical skills that we have in our program, when they don't pay attention, but more importantly, when they haven't thought about actions that they would take to prevent bad things from happening. Because see, if you haven't thought about what you're going to do, the chances of you actually taking an action and doing something are less than 5%. So in order for us to truly prevent bad things from happening, to be able to see something and then say something, we have to learn and develop the mindset of situational awareness. And the only way that you do that is through a process that you practice all the time. After about 20 days, it becomes something that you just do automatically. But that is what prepares you. And also, like I said, that's what also gives off the indicator to the predators out there that don't mess with me. I'm paying attention.
That's really good, because you're disrupting the mindset that many of us have, where we take life rather casually, unless something happens in our own neighborhood, in our own neck of the woods, and then we realize, gee, I should have seen this coming. I should have been more prepared. And so you're actually out there helping people to prepare in our most vulnerable places, like schools. What are you getting in terms of feedback and outcomes from the people that you've been working with through Paratus Group?
Yeah, so like I mentioned the Harvard Business Review study and my own unofficial studies, but we also have a survey that everybody takes at the beginning of our Be Aware, Stay Safe program. And there's 8 questions in that initial survey. And question number 5 talks about, have you or anybody in your immediate family been exposed to 8 of the top threats that are out there, like human trafficking, like suicide, like sexual assault, like robbery? And the sad statistic is 92% of the people that take our program somewhere in their family have had one of those threats close to home. And the other thing that we find out is we do then a follow-up survey after about 45 days. The feedback that we get is that people have no idea until they enroll in our program, and until they start learning the habits and the behaviors, until they start practicing the process, and until they start learning what normal is and being attentive and being perceptive, they really have no idea what was going on around them. So we basically open their eyes to a new normal. And we're also educating them about all the threats that are going on around there. All too often today, people believe hope is a strategy and that it's not going to happen to them, even though your opening remarks talked about all of these threats are getting worse. They're not just in the major cities, they're expanding out to everywhere. I'm in a very, what people believe to be a very, very safe part of North Texas, just outside of Denton, Texas. But I will tell you, every single one of those threats that you introduced at the beginning of the show are here in North Texas. And the only way that parents can prevent these bad things from happening to their kids and to their families is, first off, you have to know about them. But then secondly, you have to have some type of process that allows you to be prepared. And here's the other thing that is a big problem out there, Kelly, and why it's a cornerstone of what we're doing at the Paratus Group about getting this program to parents, is when parents aren't educated to be prepared, there's no way that they can then make sure that their kids learn the skills to be prepared. That's one of the reasons why so few people today actually know what situational awareness is, much less practice it. But it's one of the easiest things, once you practice and learn this process, to not only take responsibility for your own safety, but to make sure your kids learn and develop this skill to keep them from being victims. You know, we talk about human trafficking. Oh, go ahead.
No, no, please. I just wanted to say, first of all, I'm startled that 92% of the people you've talked to have been exposed to some form of this kind of violence that's inflicted upon our children. Also, human trafficking. We want to get into that as well. But then you talked about how hope is not a strategy, and I understand what you're saying there, yet hope has to be somewhere in the layer of that foundational principle that you're teaching people so that they can hope to learn from you and thereby hope to do something better to change the vicious cycle of violence that we've seen.
I love that. And nobody's ever said it that way. I'm going to have to remember that because I love the way that you just described that. Preparation is the only true way that we calm ourselves, that we drive fear out of our lives, that we get rid of paranoia. Because when you are prepared and your family is prepared, that is, again, how we prevent the bad things from happening. At the Paratus Group, we don't talk about law enforcement, fire department, EMTs as the first responders. We talk of them as the emergency responders. And the word responder really says it all. It means that they don't show up until something bad happens, until we predominantly dial 911. And with what's going on in our communities today, they don't really have a whole lot of time to prevent the bad things from happening, to do that community policing. So they truly are the responders. So we as parents, we as members of our communities need to learn and develop the tools so that we can become prepared, again, to prevent those bad things from happening. And then just like you started this evening off with a prayer, I am a big believer. I believe that the only true way that we can truly live the life that God wants us to live is to be prepared and to empower ourselves and our families with the tools to be safe with the bad things that are going on. And I hearken back to when I was growing up in the 60s and 70s. You didn't see all this crime, but things were different. We all took responsibility for our own safety. We all had situational awareness. We all had empathy, and we cared about what was going on in our communities. We don't see that today. So in order to make a change, we need to empower people with the necessary skills to be able to do that.
This is good, Brian. I want to take a slight break, and when we come back, I'd like to dig a little bit deeper into what you're doing through the Paratus Group and beyond situational awareness. Let's talk more specifically about what you're doing in the realm of preventing human trafficking. We'll talk about that and more after the break. You're watching America's Hope. Back in a moment. Welcome back to America's Hope. So we're talking about a very important subject, as we often do on this program, while we're focusing on hope. What I like about our guest, Brian Searcy, who is the founder of Paratus Group, is that he's painfully aware that you can have hope, but he also states that hope is not a strategy, yet as we pointed out, hope is a foundation. And Brian, I want to get back to that because there is the hope that we can prevent these kinds of atrocities from happening, or these kinds of attacks like mass shootings and what's going on in our schools, and also what we can do to prevent human trafficking, which is human slavery. And it's on steroids. It's greater now than it ever was, even when it was legal. Talk to me about that. Walk me through what you do to help groups understand and see where human trafficking might be taking place and how we can hope to prevent that by being educated, informed, and trained on how to cite what's happening.
Yeah, so human trafficking is near and dear to a big part of what we do at the Paratus Group, and it's the prevention piece. We're partnered with Voices Against Trafficking. It's one of the few nonprofits out there that really focuses on education and keeping our kids from becoming victims. There's a lot of great nonprofits that I work with whose focus is to catch the predators, to save the girls, and then to get girls and boys, and then to get help to those girls and boys. Just like, Sound of Freedom, Tim Ballard with what he's doing with the Underground Railroad. But again, that's all right of bang. That's all after the kids have already been brought into human trafficking. January is Human Trafficking Awareness Month. It's been going on forever. They've got required training in K through 12. They have required training for teachers. They have required training in businesses. Yet the problem keeps getting worse, and we're not preventing it from happening. And again, that's because people are not empowered to take the great training that they get on human trafficking, but then turn it into action. So you talked about education. One of the key things that we need to do is make sure that parents know how their kids are being groomed today by these predators. And these predators are experts. Over 80% of all human trafficking now is done via the internet. It's done on gaming systems and on apps on our phones. It's done by getting kids to take compromising pictures so that they can blackmail them, sextortation. But parents today need to develop, when they develop situational awareness, the 10 critical skills we talk about, then they are able to identify those indicators that are going on with their kids, and then they're able to do something about it. Have one great couple that took our program. Their kids are grown, and they had heard a lot about, human trafficking and what the indicators are, and they had learned that numerous times in what I call traditional type training. The problem with traditional type training is you forget it within a week. And like I said, you're not empowered to do something about it. With our program, you not only are exposed to the indicators for human trafficking or the signs of bullying or those types of things, but because we have a 5-step process, which one of those steps is to think about, how would I react if I saw one of those indicators? What would I do if I saw one of those indicators? And we make it very personal because it needs to be something that they're capable of doing. If I were to see somebody potentially being human trafficked, I'm probably going to take a very aggressive action to try and figure out what is going on. Now, this elderly couple, took our program, practiced their process, thought about what they would do if they saw one of these indicators, and they were actually in a restaurant where they saw a young girl with a man, and the behaviors were those behaviors that they talk about, that person is being human trafficked. They had already thought about what they would do if they ever came across that, because again, they practiced their process. So they didn't go up and talk to this man. They didn't cause a scene. But as soon as that man took the girl outside, they followed and they took a picture of the license plate. dialed 911 and shared that with local law enforcement. And it turns out that car had been stolen. So they were not able to immediately rescue that young girl, but they were able to give critical information to the police to hopefully allow them to find that car, find that man and that young girl, and potentially rescue that young girl. So that's just one story of people when they learn and develop situational awareness where they can make a difference. But the true part of our program for parents is to empower them and educate them on, again, not only what those indicators are, but to actually do something about it. Kelly, have you ever heard of the normalcy bias?
I have not. Enlighten me, please.
So the normalcy bias is something that we get used to. We fall into, that it's not as bad as we think it is. There's examples of people on their phone, there's a tornado coming at them, and they're on their phone videotaping the tornado because they think it's not really going to happen to them. It's not really, going to come and get them, and they end up being a victim. Well, the same thing happens with our parents out there when it comes to our kids, if they're potentially being bullied or potentially being groomed by a human trafficking predator. They think it's not going to happen to my kid. My kid would never do that. Well, they teach us when we talk, for suicide prevention and what I talk about with human trafficking, if you see any of those indicators, and again, you have to have situational awareness to be able to perceive and identify those, but then you need to take action. You need to do something about it. We've got human trafficking tip lines all over the place, but they don't get called that often because people don't take that next step. They don't act. And that's the big difference of our program is we not only empower people and educate them to be able to see what's going on, but to take an action and do something about it.
Brian, this is it's really good that you're doing this. It's very informative. And while we have you for these few minutes remaining, you talked about the 10 points, you talked about the 5 indicators. I'd like you to go through those right now. Take time and do that so we can show it on the screen and actually educate people right here and right now about what we must do to be proactively engaged in preventing human trafficking and safeguarding our children as well as men and women.
Well, and thanks, Kelly. And I took a process from the military called the OODA loop. OODA stands for Observe, Orient, Decide, and Act. And that means anytime we're getting ready to go into combat, anytime we're getting ready to have any kind of activity, we know that the enemy has a vote. So we have to be consistently observing and then orienting our forces, making a decision and acting. And those last two, decision and act, are what are so important. So I took that and put that into a 5-step process that we have as part of our program. And it starts, or the 5 steps are identify, assess, predict, decide, and act. And those first 3 steps you do all the time. So I can walk into the same coffee shop that I've been into 500 times. I'm going to stop, look, and listen, and I'm going to do the first 3 steps. I'm going to identify, is there anything going on today that sets off the hair of the back of my neck or gives me a gut feeling that is not what I think to be normal, that I may need to deal with? And if there isn't, if everything seems fine, I go to the next step. I assess. Can I sit so my back's not to the door? Where are the exits? Is there security that is in this location that if something bad happens? Who is the manager that I could potentially contact? If I'm with my family, what would I do? If I'm by myself and this happens, what would I do? And then that gets into the predict stage. If I see somebody potentially being human trafficked, what actions would I potentially take? If somebody walks in and they set the hair on the back of my neck or give me that gut feeling, what would I do? If I'm with my family, what would I have my family do? That takes about 30 or 40 seconds. I do it without even thinking. Now I'm in a prepared state. Then if something happens that is introduced into my environment, I've already prepared myself to know what normal is. I can react to something that is new that is introduced. And because I've already thought about what I'm going to do, I'm now empowered to do that. Now, to practice this process, you need to have the 10 critical skills. I'm just going to go into a few of those here quickly because normally when I talk about them, it can take a long time.
Yeah, let's not take that long, but let's give them 10. Let's give them some quick points real quickly.
You bet. So the first one is being self-aware, knowing what's going on around you, knowing what you're capable of doing, and knowing that your words and actions can make things worse. You need to be perceptive. You need to pay attention to what's going on around you. Most people today, they do not pay attention. A lost concept today is understanding that it's okay for people to have different perspectives. So we introduce the fact that it's okay. And as a matter of fact, for you to truly learn and to be constantly learning, you need to understand and listen to other people's different perspectives. That's how you improve who you are. One of the key skills then is learning agility. You need to understand that you have to be able to make constant adjustments, and that you have to understand different perspectives and be always learning. You need to learn how to make decisions. People today think they need every single bit of information before they can make a decision. I'm a 70 to 80% person. I step off and then I'm being perceptive, I'm paying attention, I'm constantly making adjustments, and that's how you move forward. But people today are afraid to make decisions. You need to be able to be an active listener. Most people today are not active listeners. They listen to respond. Kelly, you probably had a conversation with somebody, and you can tell halfway through the conversation they've stopped listening to you because they're just waiting for you to stop talking. That is not how you actually practice situation awareness. It's not how you learn or the ability to do anything. You need to have empathy. Starts with being prepared, starts with being educated, but you have to have empathy to be able to want to help other people. I can't tell you how many times I've stopped at accident sites and either directed traffic or performed emergency medical procedures on somebody that was in that accident. But I'm trained to do it, but I also have the empathy and desire to do it. And then you need to have humility. We've lost the art of having humility. We think our way is the only way. We're always right. We don't understand different perspectives. And see, you have to practice all 10 of these skills to practice situation awareness, but you have to practice these skills and the process that we have to be an effective leader and to be an effective parent.
Brian, this is amazing. I was taking notes down, wasn't being rude, but actually actively listening to you. If I can just go over real quickly, just some of the things that you said. You talked about identifying, assessing the situation, being perceptive and understanding that other people have different perspectives, and then having that empathy and paying attention and actively listening to people to comprehend and understand, and not just to give a response. And one thing you really talked about, which also brings it home, is humility. Thank you for doing what you do. And thank you for being able to be out there to offer these kinds of skills. And once we develop these skill sets, we can actively care for each other in such a way that we start prioritizing prevention of human trafficking and prevention of mass shootings and just the other things. And while it's growing, while those things are coming against us, there are more of us who really want to see something good happen. Before I let you go, paratus, what does it stand for in Latin?
Paratus is Latin for prepare. And again, that's the whole focus of what I do, which is different, which most everybody else in this space does. We're all about preparing so that we can prevent the bad things from happening. And Kelly, here's an interesting point that I talk about. Like I said, there's great people out there that go into schools and businesses and churches and prepare somebody potentially on how to do an active shooter or to respond to an active shooter. We actually believe that when we do that, we actually set the people up for failure, because you can only do so many different types of scenarios, and that scenario is never going to be the same one that you might potentially really be exposed to. That's number one. Number two, if somebody comes in and tells you, Kelly, what to do in an active shooting situation, but you can't do that, they just set them up for failure. That's why one of the key 10 critical skills for us is being self-aware, and the second part of that is knowing what you're capable of doing, so you figure out how you will respond to something. So we believe that all that response training that goes on is actually backwards. When you start with how do you learn to be able to identify, assess, and predict, how do you figure out what you're capable of doing, how do you have that process that you go through, that is what then not only prepares you and empowers you to prevent it from happening, but that is what gives you the ability to take action and protect yourself or others when and if something bad does happen. So we turn the whole process on its head and start with prevention.
Brian, I appreciate you. We want to put your contact information up on the screen. How can we reach you?
Yeah, so they can go to our website, which is www.paratus.group, and go to the contact page. They can send us a note. They can also go to a part of that website where they can download a PDF that has the 10 critical skills that we talk about in our program. And then they can also send me an email directly to Brian, Brian, at paratus.group.
Brian, seriously, of the Paratus Group, before we go, what is your hope for America?
My mission and our hope at the Paratus Group is to empower parents so they learn and develop the skill so that they can start taking the responsibility for the safety of their kids. And then more importantly, start making sure their kids learn and develop the skill. That's one of the biggest feedback that we get, is that parents not only learn how to take responsibility for the safety of their family, but they're able through contagious behavior to communicate to their kids. If in 10 years, the kids that are in elementary school and middle school today all grow up and have the ability to take responsibility for their own safety, we keep people from becoming victims. We have the empathy and humility to take responsibility for the safety of our communities. We can turn that 1 in 7 or 1 in 15 people that are actually prepared into 7 out of 7 or 15 out of 15. That is what is going to make our communities more safe. That is what is going to ensure that our republic stays the way our founders wanted it to stay, where we, the people, are responsible for our own lives and responsible for the development and the success of the United States of America.
Brian, I do appreciate you. Thank you for your service as a veteran, but also thank you for the service you're doing right now to give people knowledge and arm them with that type of knowledge that will empower them to go out and do the right thing and thereby exercise their faith and their hope and their love for each other. Appreciate you, man. Don't be a stranger. Come on
Thanks,
back.
Kelly. I appreciate you.
I want to thank our guests for joining us this hour on America's Hope. And as always, we hope that what you've learned from the various people is that they're ordinary people really striving to do extraordinary things. And most notably, they're trying to instill in people inspiration and information, which often leads to empowerment and hope and faith and love. So as always in watching this program, as I'd like to conclude, may the information and inspiration that you've received from our guest tonight ignite you and unite you to keep spreading love, freedom, and peace, and to never, ever give up on hope, because hope does prevail. Until next time, America, good night. God bless.
Rip through the heart of the city, inflicting pain and casualty. A cowardly act of despicable terror, increasing fear and misery.
Oh, it's so crazy,
the way we're living our lives.
oh, it's so crazy.
This kind of living ain't right. In times like these, do you ever wonder? We need a savior. In times like these, do you ever wonder? We need a savior. Your broken heart, so bruised and battered, tearing apart at the seams. Your wounded life, so torn and tattered, filled with regrets and broken dreams.
It's so crazy,
So crazy, the way we're living this life.
it's so crazy.
It's so crazy. This kind of living ain't right. In times like salvation. Please come and heal the nations. Lord, we need deliverance. Oh, please come and give us forgiveness. Well,
What the world needs now is love.
you know we need it, Lord, 'cause there's just too little world.
Needs now is love.
You know we need it now. There's too little love in times like these. Oh, do you ever wonder, could it be we need a Savior? Oh, in times like these, my God, could it be we need a Savior? Could it be, oh my God, could it be we Lord, we need a Savior.
Your America and my America.